Hello and welcome. In this explainer, we're going to tackle one of the most practical questions for any beekeeper out there. What is the absolute best fluid to use when you're monitoring for varroa mites in your hive? Let's jump right in.
So let's dive into this question. Because, getting an accurate mite count isn't just another task on the list. It is your first and honestly your best line of defense against the single biggest threat to your colonies, the Varroa destructor mite.
And right away, we hit a dilemma. To get a really reliable count, you need a fluid that can actually separate those stubborn mites from your bees. But there are a few options, so which one is really the best for you? Does it need to be pricey? Does it have to be, lethal to the bees? That's what we're about to find out.
First up, let's take a look at the reigning champion of mite monitoring. I'm talking about the method that's been the industry benchmark for accuracy for years, the one all the others are measured against.
And that benchmark? Yep, it's the alcohol wash. It's what researchers and big-time commercial beekeepers use because it's just so consistent, it's fast, and it is super, super accurate. The alcohol basically works as a solvent, breaking the mite's crazy strong grip on the bee, and it kills them almost instantly, so they just drop for a nice, easy count.
Now, this is where it gets really interesting. You'd probably think that stronger is better, right? But that is just not the case here. Research actually shows that a 70% alcohol solution is more effective at getting mites to let go than a stronger 91% solution. It's just a perfect example of how the right tool for the job isn't always the most powerful one. But, and this is a big but, here's the unavoidable downside of the gold standard. Every single time you run this test, it comes at a cost. You sacrifice over 300 bees from your sample. Now, to put that in perspective, that's less than 1% of a healthy buzzing hive. But for a lot of beekeepers, that's still a pretty big drawback to think about. Okay, so if the gold standard isn't exactly perfect, what are the challengers? Are there other methods that are just as accurate, but maybe a little bit cheaper or, gentler on the bees? Let's explore two really common and kind of surprising alternatives that give the gold standard a run for its money. So our first challenger comes right out of your kitchen cabinet. I mean, really? Can something as simple and as cheap as a bit of dish soap and water actually go toe-to-toe with the lab-grade standard of isopropyl alcohol? Well, the results are pretty amazing. The data shows that. Yes, it absolutely can. A simple mix of 2 tablespoons of Dawn Ultra in a gallon of water works by breaking the surface tension, which makes the mites release their grip. And get this, it's just as effective as the 70% alcohol wash. Plus, it has the huge advantage of being way less lethal. If you give them a good rinse, a lot of the bees can be safely returned to the hive after the test. Of course, there's always a catch. The soap creates all these suds and foam, which can make spotting those tiny little mites a real pain. But don't worry, there's a pretty clever and simple trick to get around this. If you just place a small 10 by 10 magnifying mirror underneath your counting jar, you can see right past the bubbles and get a perfectly clear view of the mites that have settled at the bottom. All right, our second alternative is another thing you can just grab at the hardware or auto parts store, Windshield washer fluid. It's actually become a really popular low-cost substitute for alcohol. The winter-grade formulas are especially good because they're designed not to foam up. So it's cheap, and it works pretty well. But here's the thing you have to watch out for. Be really mindful of the brand you buy. A lot of washer fluids have this strong blue or orange dye in them. That dye can create a really dark background in your jar, making it incredibly hard to see the tiny pale-colored mites, and that could throw off your whole count. Okay, time for the main event, the head-to-head comparison. Now that we know the players, let's put them side by side and see how they really stack up against each other on the things that matter most to a beekeeper: accuracy, cost, and just how easy they are to use. And this chart just lays out all the trade-offs perfectly. You can see both the alcohol and the soapy water are rated extremely high for accuracy. Washer fluid is just a little behind at high. But look where soapy water really shines. It's very low cost and the huge pro of being non-lethal. You just have to deal with the suds. And of course, the biggest con for alcohol is sacrificing all those bees. And when you look at just the cost, wow, the difference is really striking. Soapy water is, by a massive margin, the most economical choice. If you're running a lot of tests across a bunch of hives, these savings can really add up over a season. That makes it a super attractive option for any beekeeper trying to stick to a budget. So, after looking at all the data, what's the final verdict? Which fluid should you be reaching for when it's time to do your mite count? Well, as it turns out, there isn't one single answer for everyone. It really just depends on what your top priority is. It really breaks down into two paths. If your main goal is speed and just rock-solid, consistent results, especially if you're out in the bee yard and need a quick answer, then the 70% alcohol wash is probably still your best bet. But if your priority is saving a little money and, more importantly, saving your bees, then soapy water is the clear winner. You get the same accuracy without the sacrifice. But hold on, before we wrap this up, I want to leave you with one final, absolutely critical piece of information. Because you can choose the perfect fluid, have the fanciest equipment, and follow every step, but none of it will matter without this one single non-negotiable technique. So, here it is. The most important thing is this. No matter if you use alcohol, soap, or washer fluid, the true effectiveness of your test comes down to the shake. You have got to do a vigorous swirling shake for a full 1 to 2 minutes. Don't cut it short. That physical action is what actually dislodges the mites. So which fluid will you choose? And more importantly, are you ready to shake it like you mean?